"We hope you suffer," my family said as they drove away. So I did, then sent them photos of everything they'd never have. I remember the moment with such obscene clarity, it almost tastes metallic in my mouth. Not like a memory, but a wound that never fully closed. The gravel crunched beneath their tires as they reversed out of the driveway like they were escaping a crime scene. No hesitation, no backward glance. The house behind me was silent, colder than the wind cutting through my jacketless arms. A hollow shell now that their voices no longer filled it with their noise. My voice had never mattered there anyway. They didn't just leave, they made a show of it. Boxes were packed with practiced swiftness, as if they'd fantasized about this for years. My father didn't speak much, just carried the last of the duffel bags to the trunk while avoiding my eyes. My mother was the one who locked the door behind her, with a smug finality that felt ceremonial. My sister, perched in the back seat, grinned through the cracked window like she was watching a dog being dropped off at the pound. And before they peeled away, they gave me their parting gift. My mother leaned out the window, not crying, not even angry, just satisfied. "We hope you suffer," she said. They all nodded like it was an oath. And then the engine roared, the tires kicked dirt onto my shoes, and just like that, they were gone. I stood on the porch with a ripped backpack, $3 in my wallet, and a phone so cracked it barely turned on. 18 years old, unwanted, unmissed. I didn't scream. I didn't chase them. There was no point. I walked back into the house, the air stale and the lights off, already half forgotten by the structure that had never been a home. There was nothing left for me inside except silence, cold tile, and a mattress on the floor of a room that still smelled faintly of mold and synthetic cleaning products. The first night was the worst, not because of fear, though it was there, lurking, but because of that internal voice repeating what they'd said. Those 4 words burned into the walls of my skull like graffiti carved with a knife. "We hope you suffer." And I did. For months, I did. The electricity was cut within 2 weeks. The fridge stopped humming, the heat turned off, and I learned that hunger has a rhythm. It comes in waves at first, but over time, it flattens into a constant, dull throb in your stomach. I ate whatever I could steal or scrape together. Cans of expired soup from the church dumpster, half-eaten gas station burritos left on top of trash bins. I learned to time my visits to the store when the day-old bread was being cleared out. Showers became luxuries, not habits. I used to rinse off in the public restroom at the park near the train tracks when it got warm enough. I layered my clothes in the winter like armor, learning to sleep with my shoes on so the rats wouldn't nibble at my feet. Nights were long and cold, filled with the kind of thoughts you don't tell anyone about once you survive them. I didn't go to college. There was no money, no car, no bus fare. But there was a library 3 blocks away with heat and Wi-Fi and free books. I went every day, not for escape but for data, resumes, online courses, PDFs on electrical engineering, basic coding, and personal finance. I taught myself how things worked, computers, circuits, algorithms. I stopped waiting for opportunity and started constructing one. I found an old laptop in a junk pile behind a tech repair shop. The screen was cracked but functional. I bartered with the guy running the store, cleaning out his garage in exchange for access to spare parts and use of a soldering station. I brought that Frankenstein machine to life on the floor of that moldy bedroom, taught myself enough Linux to make it run, and started building something from the wreckage they left me in. Freelancing gigs came slowly, transcription, data entry, designing logos for companies that didn't exist yet. I built profiles under fake names to look older, more credible. I wasn't picky, I just needed momentum. Every dollar was a rebellion. Every invoice paid was a middle finger to their belief that I was worthless. I didn't post anything online. No sad statuses, no desperate GoFundMe links. I kept my suffering private, as requested. But pain has a way of refining you if you don't let it rot you. The boy they left behind died in that house. The one who emerged was sharper, quieter, wired with something harder than hope. I moved out after 14 months. Found a roommate on a shady site. The apartment was a fire hazard with cracks in the walls wide enough to see daylight through, but it had a working toilet and a front door that locked. I worked overnight shifts unloading trucks and came home to code until my fingers ached. Learned how to turn raw traffic into money, how to manipulate algorithms, how to sell what people didn't know they wanted until they clicked. I registered an LLC at 19, built a site that looked like a company with 10 employees, when it was really just me and 2 phones and a voice modulator for customer service calls. I reinvested everything, slept 3 hours a night, ate ramen and multivitamins, and saved like I was preparing for war. At 21, I got my first real break. A company overseas wanted my data sorting API. I didn't even know if the contract was legal. I signed it anyway. $50,000 wired into my account. I cried for 10 seconds, then built 5 more tools. I never stopped building. 2 years later, I walked into a dealership and bought the car my father mocked me for drawing in the margins of my notebooks. Sleek, fast, black like an oil spill. The salesman asked if I wanted to test drive it. I said no, handed him the check, and left without a word. Then came the condo. 36 floors up. View of the skyline like a someone looking down on the ant farm. Minimalist. Stone countertops, windows like glass walls. I didn't furnish it right away. Just brought in my laptop, a mattress, and a single chair to sit in while I watched the lights below and let the silence remind me what I'd earned. That's when I started sending the photos. No messages, no contact, just postcards, always unsigned, always with the same style, high-resolution images of things they swore I'd never touch. The car parked outside a private lounge, the condo's floor-to-ceiling view during golden hour. A photo of me on stage at a tech awards gala, shaking hands with someone they'd recognize from TV. All of it without context, no address, just their names on the envelope. I sent one to my mother first, then one to my father, then my sister, one every month. A rhythm of success, a pulse of proof. They wanted me broken. I became a monument. I never included a return address, never explained anything. I imagined them opening the envelopes in their new home, some prefab suburban hell they downgraded into, and staring at the life they tried to burn out of me. I liked to picture the way they sat in silence after, not shocked, not regretful, just confronted. Because suffering didn't make me soft. It made me exact. I didn't need revenge. I became the outcome they couldn't calculate. I didn't speak their names in interviews, didn't write about them online. I made sure their cruelty died in obscurity, while my life ascended, slowly, coldly, like a machine with no brakes. They had hoped I would suffer, and I did. But then I built something from the ashes they left me in. Now I just send proof. No words. No thanks. Only photos of everything they'll never have. The postcards didn't provoke any response. Not at first. I wasn't expecting one. I didn't want phone calls or letters begging for forgiveness. I didn't care for closure. I wasn't sending those snapshots to reconnect. I was documenting their failure, mailing evidence that their cruelty hadn't crushed me. It had created something they couldn't control. What mattered was the silence, the absence of guilt, the lack of a single attempt to reach out. They never asked how I survived, never questioned where the money came from. No apology, no denial, just a void that confirmed everything I already knew. My business grew faster than I expected. The more I stayed quiet, the more people paid attention. I learned how to navigate conversations with venture capitalists and clients twice my age. I tailored my speech, adjusted my posture, and sharpened my instincts. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just knew I couldn't afford to slip. I reinvested every dollar, hired freelancers, outsourced development, spent my nights testing prototypes, building back-end infrastructure, managing servers like a conductor in a one-man orchestra. I didn't post selfies, didn't show off my meals. My online presence was strategic, designed to draw in contracts without exposing who I really was. I created a version of myself that was professional, polished, untouchable. Behind the curtain, though, I remembered everything. Every insult. Every time they laughed when I said I wanted more than a warehouse job. Every smirk when they handed me rejection in the form of silence. That weight didn't disappear. It turned into pressure, focus, a mental alarm clock that rang even when I didn't want it to. One evening, I received an invitation to speak at a private panel hosted by an investment firm that had once ignored my emails. I didn't decline. I arrived in a tailored suit, shook hands with people whose names were printed on skyscrapers, and gave a talk about building from the ground up, without a single mention of them. Not because I was being respectful, but because irrelevance was the final insult. That night, I walked to the hotel bar afterward and ordered a drink I'd once seen my father down while pretending to be the head of the household. I sipped it alone, in a corner booth, scrolling through an inbox full of business inquiries and consulting requests. I could have smiled, but I didn't, not out of bitterness. There just wasn't anything left to prove in that moment. I had already proven it by breathing in a room they told me I'd never enter. 2 days later, I sent them another photo. No caption, as always. Just an image of the conference badge around my neck and the luxury suite behind me. I imagined them sitting on that beige couch they bought secondhand from a thrift store, staring at the picture and saying nothing. I liked thinking of their silence as a form of panic. Time passed. Success compounded. One contract led to another. And soon I wasn't just making money. I was building an empire. I bought a second property overseas, not to live in, but to have somewhere no one could reach me. A place where I could vanish if I ever wanted to. Somewhere they could never find. I employed people now, paid salaries, covered health plans, wrote checks that paid other people's rents. I watched them come into work every morning without knowing anything about me beyond my position and expectations. I didn't need to be liked. I needed things to run. Efficient. Predictable. Safe. And still, the house they left me in stood, empty, broken, rotting from the inside out. I'd driven past it once long after they sold it, out of a compulsion I couldn't explain. Windows shattered, weeds overtaking the fence, the siding peeled like dead skin. I didn't go inside, didn't even stop the car, just stared for a moment before pulling away. I had thought about buying it more than once, not to live in, not even to fix up, just to destroy, to level it to the ground and pour concrete over it, a personal burial site. But I didn't. It wasn't worth the fuel. Eventually I hired a photographer, told them to follow me around for 3 days, capture what they saw, no poses, no filters, just the reality of what life looked like now, the meetings, the drives, the casual conversations with high-level executives, the fine dinners I never touched, the skyline outside my window. I picked 5 photos, sent them each one, still no words. I knew the postcards were getting through because once I received a call from a blocked number. I didn't answer, didn't even let it ring twice. I watched it flash on the screen and then disappear. A part of me wanted to hear who it was. Another part enjoyed the guessing more. I never heard from that number again. Eventually, someone told me my sister was working as a receptionist in a chain dental office on the edge of the city. The same sister who used to unplug my computer before I could save my work. Who told everyone at school I was adopted because she didn't want to claim me. I didn't contact her, just sent a photo of the car I'd parked outside that office. She would know. That was the thing. They always knew. They recognized the angles, the objects, the symbols. I didn't have to explain the value. I didn't need to narrate the climb. The silence made everything louder. At 25, I was invited to a private gala, billionaire tier. Not just money, but legacy. People whose names were etched into the bones of industries. I wore a suit that cost more than their combined monthly rent and arrived without an entourage. I didn't need one. I wasn't there to network. I was there to remind myself that I belonged. I stood in a circle of founders and investors while someone read my name off a list, praising my ability to scale a company with 0 seed funding. They applauded. I didn't smile, just nodded. I was used to applause I didn't ask for. I went home that night and stared at the ceiling of my penthouse. It was quiet, like always. No celebration, no cheering, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock I'd picked out, because it reminded me of an airport terminal. Cold, sterile, always moving forward. The next morning, I sent them one more photo, a wide shot of the gala ballroom. No faces, just chandeliers and gold cutlery and name cards written in calligraphy. I knew it would hit different, not because of the wealth on display, but because it was the kind of event they used to talk about as a joke, a fantasy they dismissed as fiction. It was real now. I was there. They weren't. That was the year I changed my last name, legally, quietly. I didn't announce it, just made the switch on my paperwork, my passports, my driver's license. Erased the name they gave me from every document that mattered. It felt surgical, clean, like closing the last file on a corrupted hard drive. They no longer had access to my life. Not digitally, not legally, not emotionally. They couldn't search me, tag me, or attach themselves to anything I did. I'd become untouchable. And it was exactly what I wanted. Years passed. I didn't get married, didn't start a family. I didn't want to recreate what I'd escaped. I wasn't broken. I was focused. Every day still felt like proof. Every breath was an act of defiance. Eventually, the postcards stopped. Not because I was done, but because they'd served their purpose. I had nothing left to show them. Everything else belonged to me, not them, not their memory, not their judgment. Just me. But I kept the first one I ever sent, tucked it inside the drawer of my desk, a photo of the front of the penthouse taken from the opposite rooftop, the city glowing around it. That image wasn't for them. It was for me, a reminder that suffering doesn't end you. It exposes you. Either you drown in it, or you sharpen your teeth and learn to bite back. And I did. I never planned to go back. There was nothing waiting for me. No warmth, no apology, no familiar face that ever held real concern. But closure doesn't wait for permission. It claws its way in whether you want it or not. You can build towers high enough to scrape the clouds, pad your success with silence and discipline, but some echoes catch up. It started with an envelope. White, unmarked. Hand-delivered to the security desk in my building by someone who left no name. Inside was a church bulletin, folded, stained in one corner, faint scent of cigarette ash embedded in the paper. The name printed at the top didn't surprise me. Margaret Lane, my mother, dead at 57. Service on Saturday. Closed casket. Family only. I stared at it for a long time. Not out of sadness, just calculation. I hadn't spoken her name aloud in nearly a decade. She'd existed only in photos I mailed without return, in memories filtered through grit and hunger. But there it was, a formal announcement of her expiration. No calls, no message from my father. Just a sheet of paper with a time and a date, dropped like a reminder that unfinished business doesn't vanish. It waits. I didn't RSVP, didn't wear black. I arrived at the service in a steel gray jacket, no tie, collar sharp, shoes silent on the linoleum floor. The church was smaller than I expected. Peeling paint on the baseboards, cheap artificial flowers tucked into chipped ceramic pots. They hadn't upgraded their faith with their furnishings. Familiar faces lined the pews, though older, dimmer. They turned when I entered. A few eyes widened, a couple mouths fell open. Nobody spoke. My father sat in the front row, hair thinner, shoulders slumped forward, as if the weight of life had finally bent him. He didn't react when I walked past, just stared forward, stiff and silent, like a statue built out of failures. My sister sat beside him, face pale, her expression unreadable. She clutched a folded tissue in one hand and a phone in the other, eyes darting from me to the pulpit, like she couldn't decide which presence threatened her more. I didn't sit. I stood in the back, arms crossed, scanning the stained glass as if I might find sense in colored shards. The preacher spoke nonsense, generic praise, scripted grace. Nothing about the woman he described matched the one who left me in that house without looking back. I listened out of obligation, not respect. When it ended, I turned to leave, but a hand grabbed my arm. My sister. "Why did you come?" she asked, voice lower than I remembered. Older, tired. I didn't answer. She looked thinner, harsher. Life hadn't gone easy on her, but not enough to break her spirit the way they tried to break mine. She searched my face for something she never deserved to find. "You didn't say anything," she added, softer this time. Not even a word. I looked her dead in the eye. She already said the last one. I pulled away and walked out. The air outside was cleaner, sharper. I got into the car, same one from the postcard, and drove without a destination, letting the road peel away from that place like old skin. I didn't return to the penthouse that night. I stopped at a small motel off the interstate, paid in cash, and stared at the ceiling until morning arrived. That visit was final. I didn't return for my father's funeral when he passed 3 months later. The news came via a cold email from a lawyer managing the estate. He left behind debt, a rusted truck, and a final house they could never afford to fix. No will, no instructions, no last-minute confession. I sent one last photo. Just one. A screenshot of the message. Subject line, estate finalization notification. No caption, no return, Just that, and I was done. I stopped mailing anything after that. No more proof, no more reminders. They had faded fully and forever into the background noise of history. Irrelevant. The empire I built no longer needed comparison. My success didn't require a mirror. I had climbed far enough that looking back didn't matter. Every deal I signed, every milestone I passed, became internal. Quiet victories, private expansions. I restructured my company into a holding group, diversified, stepped back from the spotlight, let others speak while I made decisions behind closed doors. I no longer chased recognition. I chased control, and eventually peace arrived, not as joy, not as forgiveness, but as distance, a clean line between what was and what is. Years later, I sold one of my companies to a foreign investor for a figure so large I didn't bother checking the conversion rate. I celebrated by sitting alone on a quiet balcony with a drink I didn't finish, staring at a city that once felt unreachable. I never returned to the old neighborhood. I never drove by the graveyard. I never needed to. Their final words, "We hope you suffer," had been fulfilled. I did suffer, deeply, viciously, quietly, and then I did what they couldn't. I endured it. I turned it into foundation, into firepower, into forward motion, and when they were gone, I kept going. Not out of spite, not out of pain, but because survival became standard, and winning became natural. The story ended without their permission. No apology, no resolution, just a life they couldn't ruin, and one they'd never recognize if they saw it.